Simply investing in the S&P 500 is a super popular strategy right now in the United States. If you don't know how to do that, if you don't know how to open a brokerage account and get started, that's what I'm going to talk about today. There's 7 steps. None of them are incredibly complicated. I'm going to start with step 3, but be warned, step 1 and 2 are the most important. So be sure to stay to the end while I'll circle back to step 1 and 2. All right, let's go for a walk and talk about step 3. Step 3 is to pick a custodian where your money's going to be held. And in the United States, as I record this, Charles Schwab, Fidelity, and Vanguard are probably the most popular custodians for people that are managing their own money. So the first thing is to pick one of those 3 and a quick phone call. Just do a quick web search to find the phone numbers for the custodians. What I would ask is, what are the costs to invest in the S&P 500? And know that there's a mutual fund version of the S&P 500, and then there's also an exchange traded fund. And they should be identical as far as their holdings. There might be a difference in cost. And since they're basically identical, I would lean towards the one that's less expensive. Okay, so that's one factor. The next factor is, what is the minimum investment to get going in one of these tools, the mutual fund or the exchange traded fund? For the mutual funds, it tends to be anywhere from $1,000 to $5,000 to get going, probably closer to $1,000. And that's the initial investment. But once you have that investment, then the incremental investments above that are typically pretty low. I mean, in the neighborhood of like $50. So if that's a deciding factor for you, call up all 3 custodians, ask them if there's trading costs to get in and out. When I started in the business over 20 years ago, it was $75 or $80 to do a trade like that every time you bought. So while the minimum to add money might be $50, if you were paying $70 for a trade, if you did $100 as your investment, 70% of it went to fees. But those days, fortunately, are behind us now. Most custodians like Schwab, Fidelity, and Vanguard are going to offer inexpensive trades for you, and probably zero cost trades to get in. So the first one is to pick your broker. The second one is just to open an account. And I mentioned the big 3 brokers, the big 3 type of accounts for people. There's hundreds of them, but the ones most people have to think about is, do you want a Roth IRA? Do you want a regular IRA? Or do you want a regular taxable account? And I would actually say it probably makes sense, as long as you're doing paperwork, just do the paperwork for all 3 accounts, as long as you can meet the minimum investment for each. And open up an account in each. Oftentimes you don't have to fund it. There are income requirements or restrictions on a Roth, and you just want to make sure that you're qualifying for that. So, but it probably makes sense to at least open it up so you've got the paperwork done and you can add money to that later. So that's step 4. Step 5 is picking actually the investment, the S&P 500 investment. Again, there's mutual funds, and then there's exchange traded funds. And, the holdings should be very, very similar to each other. If there's not, there's something wrong there. So look at what the minimum investment is. Look at what the incremental investment is. Look at what the cost to get into the investment, into the S&P 500, what the trading cost is. Hopefully that's 0. If there's any cost to get out of the account, again, hopefully that should be 0. And that brings up a good point. Sorry, there's somebody's a car alarm's going off there. Now it's done. But a question a lot of people would have, and it's a good question, is, hey, Azul, why not just do this at my local bank? And the reason I think you don't do it at your local bank is because it's probably going to be much more expensive. There's going to be all of these little fees, and maybe to open up the account and to invest in the S&P 500, maybe all of that is pretty close or even less expensive than what Schwab, Fidelity, or Vanguard would charge you. But over the lifetime, I suspect it's going to cost more money at the local bank, right? It's, you know, that's what Schwab, Fidelity, and Vanguard exist for. So I really think at your local bank, you're not going to get the level of service and you're not going to get the low cost that you would. So that's just my take. I don't know your local bank. I don't know your situation. I should mention here, you know, this is not financial advice. It can't be. I don't know your situation, but I'm trying to walk you through the easy steps to open up an account and start investing. Remember, it's not enough to save, right? One of the secrets to building your net worth is to actually spend less than what you earn. Turns out that's a really big challenge for a lot of folks. Half of people in the United States earning over $500,000 a year don't save a dime. So step one is to spend less than what you earn. Step two is to invest that. You want compounding to work in your favor, right? So let's continue on. So step six, what we've kind of covered this one already. What is the minimum addition? Again, it should be really, really low. And then step seven is just to continue to invest. As I said just a few moments ago, it's not enough to just save. You also have to invest. And unfortunately, when you invest, you know, it's going to have some volatility associated with it. If you want no volatility, if you want no ups and downs in your account, essentially that's going to be putting it in the bank in an FDIC insured account. Right now, the interest rates on those are not horrible, but it's probably not going to stay that way relative to what inflation is. So if you want your money to grow, if you want compounding to work in your favor, remember, compounding works in your favor as long as the return that you get is greater than inflation. But it works against you. It's a double-edged sword. Compounding works against you if the return that you're getting is less than inflation. And then things accelerate, and that acceleration works against you. I want the acceleration to work for you. Okay, so that was step seven, but I told you there's step one and step two are the most important ones. And step one is first thinking through, you know, what are your goals? What are you trying to achieve with your money? Importantly, what's your risk tolerance? What kind of volatility? You know, if you woke up and your account was down 20, 30, 40%, what does that feel like? You know, so what's your risk tolerance? What's your liquidity? You know, if you have needs for this money in the next 12 months, 24 months, does it make sense to have it in the stock market? You know, the stock market can go down and it can stay down. It can easily stay down for more than a couple years. So the more time that you have, the less risky it is to have stock investments. So step one is really thinking about your situation. I would suggest you work with a fee-only financial advisor. You can find one by Googling one. Okay, let's keep going. Step two is how do you best achieve those goals? And yes, the S&P 500 investments have worked very well in the past, but the S&P 500 of today, you know, this is as that car commercial went, you know, this is not your father's S&P 500. Yes, it is a market cap weighted index, which means it has the 503 largest by value, by market capitalization companies in the United States. It represents about 80% of all the market caps of publicly traded stocks. So that gives you some diversification, but it's important to know that Apple computers alone represents about 7.5% of the index. This is as of May of 2023. Microsoft represents about 7% of the index. So those two alone represent about 15%. Amazon represents another 3%. And NVIDIA represents a little over 2.5%. So those four stocks represent 20% of the entire S&P. And if I said, hey, you should have an account where, you know, essentially you have four stocks, and that's going to give you the market return, you know, that would probably feel pretty risky to a lot of people. But somehow when it's in a black box, it feels differently. And that's the other thing I want to share with you is the very nature of just investing in an exchange traded fund, a black box type approach, is You know, what information are you going to use if the market's down 20, 30, 40% to say, I'm going to stay the course, or I'm going to buy more? I think the market's wrong. I think the future's bright for this company. The problem with an exchange traded fund is it's almost like a black box. And when that black box is going up, boy, it feels really, really good. But when that black box is going down, it feels really, really bad. And that can be hard if you don't have a fundamental understanding of what you own. So I think what I call black box investing is not for everybody. And particularly when the market goes down, it's harder to stay the course when you've got that. I want to leave you with one other piece of information that I think is really important. As I record this in June of 2023, if you look at year-to-date returns through the end of May, which is the most recent that we have for month ends, you know, the market, the S&P 500's up just under 9%. And I talked about the weighting of those stocks. If you take out Apple, Microsoft, and Google, which are each up about 37%, if you take those three out, and then if you take out Amazon, which is up about 45% year to date, and Nvidia, which is almost doubled year to date, it's up 160%. If you take those stocks out, instead of the S&P 500 being up by 9%, the S&P 500 would only be up by 1.5%. And if you take out two more positions, which would be Facebook and Tesla, the S&P 500 would actually be negative. So in this case, the concentration of those positions has really helped the S&P 500 get the return that it's gotten. But you know, again, it's a double-edged sword. It can work the other way. So I just want you to be cautious. It sounds super simple, but I think it's a lot more complicated than just saying, I'm going to park my money in the S&P 500. I've dedicated my life to helping people build portfolios that meet their goals. You know, if only it were that simple that we just park money in the S&P 500, right? There's a reason that Warren Buffett's money, personal money, is not parked in the S&P 500, right? His money is parked in Berkshire Hathaway. And so while it's easy for him to tell other people, hey, I would do this, it's a different story. You know, you look at Warren's portfolio, it's a portfolio of carefully selected stocks that he has a lot of faith in, that he can answer the question, if this stock goes down by 20, 30, 40%, do I want to buy more? Do I want to sell? And I want you to have that advantage as well. I also want you to have the advantage of watching this video up here that talks about the average retiree income in America, and this video down here that talks about 5 reasons to retire as soon as you can. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.